When did you start thinking about owning a practice?
I found myself at a crossroad. So pretty much a split road where I know if I continue along this path to become an optometrist director, then that's it. I would have achieved my goal. But on the flip side, I also wanted to develop a area of special interest. For me, it was advanced contact lenses and orthokeratology. And I thought, look, if I become a director, that's great, but I might not be able to pursue this path in the future. That's why I decided to leave corporate optometry and pursue independent optometry, which ultimately led me to opening my own practice.
Welcome to The Focused View, the podcast for eye care professionals across Australia. In each episode, we bring together leaders from optometry, optical dispensing, and business to share insights, practical strategies, and the latest developments shaping independent practice today. I'm your host, Michael Nasser, and together we'll explore how innovation, collaboration, and smart business thinking can drive growth, enhance patient care, and strengthen the future of independent optometry. Whether you're a student, an early career professional, or an established practice owner, The Focused View is your go-to source for knowledge, inspiration, and connection. The Focused View is brought to you by Vision Connection, supporting independent eye care professionals across Australia through collaboration, education, and business growth. By working closely with leading suppliers and industry partners, Vision Connection offers unique opportunities that help independents stand out and succeed. To find out more, visit their website, visionconnection.com.au.
So Sheila, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, really excited to have you on and to be talking about the things that we're talking about. I feel like, especially for the younger audience or the audience that are thinking about starting a business, this is going to be a really insightful conversation, and we're going to go through lots of really cool things. But before we do that, and for the context of the listeners, can you give us a bit of a background as to who you are and a bit of your background and how you ended up in optometry?
My name is Sheila. I graduated from UNSW in 2020 with a Bachelor of Vision Science and Masters of Clinical Optometry. I've had experience working in various independent and corporate practice after graduating, and I co-founded Eye Definition Optometrist in March 2023. This is a boutique optometry practice located in Wallay Creek, just minutes away from Sydney Airport. For myself in the practice, I have a special interest in orthokeratology and myopia control, advanced contact lenses. My business partner in the practice does behavioral optometry as well as children's vision and vision training. Besides this, I'm also currently the co-chair of Young Optometrists. This is a group that has been established to support optometrists in their first decade of practice and address needs specific to young professionals finding their way in the optometry profession. On top of that, I am also a professional service consultant at Medicon Australia, where I do troubleshooting for advanced contact lenses as well as do educational events for the company.
I mean, lots of things happening there, and I guess a strong leadership sort of mentality with some of the things that you've embarked on, which is really, really great to see. You know, I can resonate a little bit with having a little bit of different perspective across different, I guess, business types. And so, you know, it's really good to speak to people like yourself because you can speak about things probably from a few different perspectives, which is really powerful. We're going to focus a lot on the practice today that you started and talk about the dynamics of that specifically. And if we start to hone in on that, you know, with regards to your optometry journey, you know, you mentioned you graduated in 2020. When did you start thinking about owning a practice?
I can't pinpoint when I decided to want to own an optometry practice or open an optometry clinic, but I feel like it's from as early as I could remember when I was an optometry student. I just had a goal one day. I want to open my own clinic, want to be able to develop professionally and as a clinician and just grow from there.
So something you harbored, I guess, naturally from the outset. Coming out of uni, what was your first step, and what were you thinking about what you were doing at that point with regards to the work experience that you were undertaking or the work experience that you ended up doing? Did you take that traditional path of going down the corporate line, or was it more about, no, I'm pretty much working up towards owning my own practice from the moment I graduate?
So coming out of university, I had a few things on my mind. The first thing I wanted to do almost was to grow as much as I can and to be a really good practitioner, gain as much skills, just to be pretty much the best practitioner I can be and learn as much as I can. I've learned that in your first 6 months of practice, that pretty much shapes your routine, your habits for the rest of your career. So I really wanted to use that beginning time to just learn rather than focusing on other things that I could achieve down the track. My second goal was to pursue an area of special interest. Now, I was told very early on as a student that in optometry, you have to find something that you are passionate about. Find something where you have a special interest in, because normal bread and butter optometry is great, but there will be a point in your career that you find that that might not be enough. And having something to fuel your desire to grow really does make you want to motivate yourself and learn to be better than you were yesterday or better than you were when you first graduated. My last point that I had on my mind was I wanted to be an independent optometry owner. So out of those three things, the first thing I mentioned about having the mindset of growing to be the best person I can is the most achievable. That's my first step. And in fifth year optometry, Specsavers Australia held an information night for final year students. And it was at that event that I learned it's an opportunity where you can join Specsavers, join their Pathways program, and ultimately become a director and own your own franchise. And to me, that sounded very safe. There's a guidebook, someone's gone through it, you'll get support along the way, and it's a way for me to own my own practice. That's why I joined Specsavers at the beginning. And I was able to learn a lot. I saw a great variety of patients every day, facilitated me to become a good practitioner very quickly. My mentors were very good as well. They fast-tracked my pathway project and I passed the interview, and pretty much I was on my way to becoming an optometrist director as soon as I joined the Pathways program. However, it was at this point that I found myself at a crossroad. So pretty much a split road where I know if I continue along this path to become an optometrist director, then that's it. I would have achieved my goal. But on the flip side, I also wanted to develop an area of special interest. For me, it was advanced contact lenses and orthokeratology. And I thought, look, if I become a director, that's great, but I might not be able to pursue this path in the future. And that's why I decided to leave corporate optometry and pursue independent optometry, which ultimately led me to opening my own practice.
Yeah. Having heard what you've said there, and going back to those original comments of finding your passion and your specialization and the bread and butter optometry, with regards to what you were seeing out there. Business ownership obviously was something that you aspired for early on. Seeing that Specsavers provided that model nice and clear in a way that enabled you to sort of visualize what that looks like in a relatively, I don't know if easy is the right word, but it was clear to see, I guess. And that might then have swayed you. And again, correct me if I'm wrong in any of these assumptions, into that, oh, well, maybe this part, because I get the business ownership under my belt, tick, I'm a business owner from that point of view, or a business partner. What was it? And at what point did you sort of, and you mentioned why, but at what point did you recognize that going down the corporate store director model may not be the one? I mean, like I said, you mentioned it was because you could see that you weren't going to be doing the specialization that you have identified as what was important to you. Was it something that you had from the outset as a hesitation, or did it develop a little bit later on down the course of that, I guess, that corporate experience?
So when I first joined Specsavers as a graduate optometrist, I made it really clear to my employers and my director at the time that I joined Specsavers because I wanted to one day own my own practice. And they understood that. That's why they supported me throughout the whole process. And I guess I just stuck along that pathway throughout the 2 years. However, there were little things that happened along the way that made me realize ultimately that maybe this wasn't the path that I wanted for myself. And maybe I wanted to explore other areas of optometry, such as independent practice.
Yeah.
For myself, like in university optometry school, I've always worked in independent optometry, even as a student dispenser.
Okay.
So working in corporate optometry like Specsavers, this was my first graduate job and it was my first time working in corporate. It was great. I loved it. It was a good learning experience. And for me, it was something that was safe and, as I mentioned, was passed out for at the beginning.
Yeah.
However, it wasn't a specific moment that I paused to reflect. If I was to pinpoint a time, it would have been after my Pathways interview when I got accepted in that I started thinking about it a little bit more in depth. But I feel like there were little things along the track that led me to have that moment where I thought, oh,
Sure.
I think I want to pursue a passion or a area of special interest. And I guess that's where Young Optometrist came in. So
Right.
when I first graduated in optometry school, you have a cohort of friends, and they're also lovely. They're like my second family. We went from seeing each other 5 days a week, and back then optometry was 30 hours contact in university. So you can imagine going from seeing them every day for 5 years to working in practice where you have your colleagues, you have your workmates, but ultimately I had friends who have moved out to rural regional optometry. They're still settling down. Other friends who are still discovering themselves in the optometry profession. So for me, I wanted to be able to give back to the industry, and I saw that Young Optometrist was a really good avenue to do so. I was already a Young Optometrist member, but that's when I decided to join the Young Optometrist Committee in my first year after graduating. From this, I was able to meet a lot of individuals in the industry. I'm able to network with people, for example, Wilson and Megan, Rose, Celine, which would have been on this podcast previously.
Yeah, they have been.
Yeah, and they were also great. But what was actually very fruitful was our Young Optometrist getaway in 2021. And I remember that was the beginning of my second year coming out of university. And on the way onto the road trip, I was telling Wilson which was the previous chair of Young Optometrists, how I was very interested in owning my own practice. And that's why I'm doing Pathways at Specsavers. So he asked me, have you considered independent optometry? And at that point I said yes, but I think it's quite difficult to achieve. And what he said that stuck with me was, no, it's not. I think you can do it. I think you're capable. You try. And that stuck with me without me realizing. So every time, something happened where I'm making a decision to further my career and follow along this path that's already paved out for me, I started thinking, oh, what if I took a turn? What if I just leave this road that's already paved out? Would this be a good decision, or would there be more risk? And I guess that's what started everything.
That was the catalyst. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the catalyst that began my thought of, I can do independent optometry. Yes, it's hard, but Wilson did it.
Absolutely.
It's so good because at the same time, when you're talking to your peers and your friends around you, no one in my immediate friendship circle, no one in my cohort at that time was planning on opening a practice. So for me, I didn't know whether it was possible or not. But being able to network and connect to optometrists who had more experience in the industry, you can see what they've achieved. You can see what else is there in optometry.
Yeah.
And it gave me, I guess, the motivation and passion to pursue it myself.
Yeah. The thing I love about what you mentioned there, and we've had that, the Young Optometrists on recently, and we've spoken about what they're, and all too well being on the executive committee with regards to their activities and what they represent within the industry. But more than anything, what I love about what you've said is it's in real terms. You've given us an example as to the power of a group like that, which comes down to the conversations that you're having and being around like-minded people. It speaks to, you mentioned networking and the power that these conversations that can change the trajectory of, of somebody. And it's a similar instance to the podcast. Like, someone would hopefully hear what you're saying here and they could be sitting, down thinking, can I do it? And, I heard Sheila just went out and did it. And, and now she, and we're going to go through that journey obviously a little bit further, but it does speak to the power of, connecting and communicating effectively with the right people at the right time. So that's really great. Obviously, we're going to speak specifically about how you then ventured down the path of independence, but if we sort of go back to that corporate experience that you had, which obviously is pivotal with regards to how you are today, what were some of the aspects of the corporate model that I guess appealed to you? And what did you get out of it? I guess having the experience of undertaking that model and resting quite advanced in that model with regards to ownership in that context. when you look at, in reflection with that, what did you get out of it? And are there things that you brought into, your current day practice with regards to the experience you had in that sort of area?
I'll say practice ownership in corporate optometry is very safe.
Mm-hmm.
You buy into a business model that has been established and you know that it works. You have a guidebook, not literally, but in terms of mentors and directors that has gone through that pathway before, people in head office that is going to guide you down that journey. And on top of that, when you buy in as a director, you get your base salary and you get your bonus as a director based on your performance.
Right.
The business model is efficient, it's very streamlined, the operation runs very smoothly. So in my second year at Specsavers, when I was doing my projects and preparing for Pathway itself, I was able to learn a lot about business operation and the administrative side of running a business. And that was very valuable for me on top of learning all my clinical skills. I think that if I was to work in maybe a different practice, I may have not had the opportunity to be exposed to that. So I do see value in all the things that I've learned from working in corporate optometry.
Yeah.
I see a large volume of patients every day, which is a good learning curve as I become more exposed to a variety of different clinical cases. And honestly, this model would work well for optometrists that wants to develop professionally and is looking for a safe pathway. For me, I feel like staying on this pathway is good, but in terms of the area for me to learn and develop in the area of a special interest, like what I've mentioned to you, such as advanced contact lenses or the keratology, vision training, behavioral optometry, it's rare. There are corporate practices that makes it work, don't get me wrong, but there's very few, and you have to be very lucky to be able to find this kind of practice and have it working. So that's why when I thought about it, I think, okay, even though I can achieve my goal earlier, I want to spend this time I have to learn. I can put practice ownership and can achieve that later in my career and prioritize learning and growing as a practitioner. One thing that I have to say is when you buy into a corporate practice, it feels like you're just a temporary custodian of that practice. There will be directors that come before you. There will be directors that come after you. You are working to improve the business model. However, you're a small part of the business model's journey. But if you open an independent optometry practice from the ground up, it's your own. You make it grow the way you want. You set up the business how you want, and that's a reflection of you as an eye care practitioner.
I think, you obviously, it's very clear that you've made that that shift towards being independent, throughout that process. I always say there's no such thing as right or wrong in this instance. It's a matter of what works. You've been able to see, both sides of the equation and identify what works for you. And that's the most important part of it. It doesn't, obviously, every path has pros and cons, and you get flexibility in some capacity, but you also lose flexibility in some capacity, depending on the area. And, it's something that you come to learn. And I feel like having that complete ownership is really empowering, but obviously that comes with a whole heap of other challenges, and we're going to get to those. But if we look now, so you've obviously made up your mind now that, it's going to be independent optometry. You had a good chat to Wilson, and Wilson sort of, empowered you. I'm sure there were many other things. Were there other things, I guess, on that made you consider, at what point did you go, okay, now I'm going to do it. I'm going to, independent optometry is, for me, it's a viable alternative. And it's going to be something that I'm going to start pursuing. Like, what did that look like when you kind of made that decision?
Hence, the day was pretty much the day I actually did my pathways interview and got approved. I was excited because I thought, that's it. That's one checklist done. I just need to go on pathways, the program itself, and then afterwards I'll wait for a practice. But at that point, everything started coming back to me where I thought, want to do ortho-K? Is this the right path? If I do this now, would I get to learn ortho-K? Maybe in the future, but I don't know what the industry will be like in 2-3 years time. The industry is so dynamic. It's changing every single day, every single month. So if I get the opportunity to learn, maybe do that, because I still have the rest of my career to open something. And also at the same time, I thought, I do like the freedom to be able to prescribe my patients optical solutions that I like, rather than what is dictated by a company. Sometimes when you work in corporate, their products are great, But if you want to deviate from that, there's hoops that you have to jump through. Sometimes it's not possible because there's always suppliers that the company or the practice prefers. But for myself, my way of practice is I just want to give the patient what they need and what's the best solution for them. So that's when I decided, okay, I think the right decision for me is to ultimately not own a corporate franchise, because I feel like there will be other people out there that would want it a lot more than me at this point. So at that stage, I thought, okay, what do I need to do now? The first thing is, okay, let's find a job in independent optometry that will give me the opportunity to learn and develop in advanced contact lenses, which I really want to explore. And that was quite hard because for optometrists that try to change from corporate to independent, I guess it is this view where independent optometrists wants or prefers to hire someone in an independent practice. And if you're working in an area of special interest, you probably want an optometrist that already has some knowledge in that area. Now, lucky for me, I did have placement in my final year of optometry, where I was able to learn orthokeratology, but I had no exposure after graduating. So I was actually quite lucky to find an independent practice to work at. And my next step was, okay, I found an independent practice that does orthokeratology. Now I need to replan my future. So as a 20-year-old, optometrist who has spent 2 years in corporate optometry, being very sure of the path that was already written out, starting over again from square one after deciding to follow my passion to grow in the space of advanced contact lens was difficult. But in the grand scheme of things, this is only a very small portion of the rest of my career. And lucky for me, I realized that very quickly, and I just jumped into the opportunity to branch out and start again. Because I've like, look, it's never too late to start over with new goals, new objectives. And as you can see for me, practice ownership was ultimately delayed by 1 year. I still achieved it anyway.
And when you decided to go independent, what came next? So you made that decision now, which is obviously very much prefaced on the fact that, you want to get that deep exposure to your clinical interests with ortho-K in particular. So you've gone to work with somebody else, but you've obviously still harbored that business intention of owning a practice. What did that look like once you knew you wanted to go independent? You worked at a practice, you said. How long was that for? And then, what followed after that?
Oh, I had a few experiences of working in independent practice. So when it was funny because what I didn't mention before was before I joined the independent practice, I had a placement day at the practice just to make sure that I learned the flow of the practice itself. I want to make sure if I'm going to be working there, I don't impede the flow of the clinic already. I want to make sure everything runs smoothly on my first day. And on that day, I met an optometrist that I was shadowing, and they were a contractor, so they were a locum as well. And he actually locumed when I was working as a new grad at my Specsavers practice.
Right.
And he looked at me, he's like, why are you here? And I thought, I'm changing to independent optometry. His response to me was, I thought you wanted to be a Specsavers director. I'm like, yeah, I did, but I changed my mind, so I want to do ortho-K now. He's like, oh my God, are you going to be okay? That's a big change. Now you just,
Wow.
you don't know what you're going to do anymore. And I thought, yeah, like, I'll work it out eventually. So that was my first taste moving out of corporate practice.
Right.
And I guess that's how a lot of people will view it. It's like, oh, you have a path that's already set out for you, and now you're changing it. Like, are you going to be okay? Like, it's like
The doubters.
yeah. So when I joined independent optometry, I thought, okay, I still want to open a practice. Now, what kind of practice do I want to open? Do I want to open it alone, or do I want to open it with a business partner? So for me, my two biggest things is I do want work-life balance, and I do want to have the opportunity to continue to learn and grow as a clinician, not just professionally as a business owner. So my answer was very clear. I wanted a business partner. So I knew, okay, I wanted a business partner. I reached out to a friend from university that I thought would be a great fit to be a business partner with. And we thought, okay, that's great. The actual conversation actually went through by me messaging them on Facebook, because back then, it was COVID, you don't really meet out. So I popped up, and my business partner's name is Mandy. I went on Facebook and I said, "Hi, Mandy, how are you?" And Mandy replied with, "Hi, Sheila, I'm good. How are you?" And I thought, "Oh, yeah, I'm good. How's your Zip pay shares?" And at the time, Zip was, very popular. Everyone was buying into your Zip, your Afterpay. And they replied, "Yeah, it's going good. How's Zip pay for you?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's going okay. So do you want to open a practice with me?" And I just saw the three dots appear on the Facebook chat, and I thought, oh, where is this going? But after a minute, the answer was, haha, sure. So that's how I found my business partner. And we thought, okay, that's good. We want to open together. Let's put this on the side. Let's try to be really good practitioners, learn as much as we can, and revisit this when we're ready. And that was pretty much the beginning of 2022.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds like such an easy, I guess, a conversation or communication, and maybe it was, but when you really sort of, look into it, I mean, it was quite a pivotal moment for yourself because, well, I guess it comes back, how did you identify that you wanted a business partner? I mean, lifestyle was a big thing. So if you speak to that really quickly, were you getting advice from anyone, or was it just a gut instinct thing, something that came naturally to you? And then how did you identify Mandy to be the one? Was it just I mean, I'm sure there would have been, and, hopefully you're open to speaking about it. What was it about? You must have identified some qualities or something early on to reach out to her and ask her specifically, as opposed to other people. How did you decide, but I guess those 2 points?
So I guess the first question was, how did you decide you wanted to have a practice partner rather than opening alone, and whether I reached out to anyone? So in terms of wanting a business partner, it's because you get your work-life balance, you get to bounce ideas off each other, you get to logically solve problems when something arises, and when you work together, you both contribute to the practice. So ultimately, you both grow together. And you both have time now, because there's two people in the practice and not one, to grow as a clinician in your area of special interest. Just because if I wanted to open my practice myself, will I have the time? Will I have the energy to be able to further develop my clinical skills in orthokeratology? Maybe, yes. But will I be able to achieve that a lot easier with a business partner? So the latter would be a very obvious answer to me. And whether I asked anyone for opinions on whether I wanted a business partner or not, I don't believe so. I remember just having a quick brainstorm in my head one day, thinking, what's going to work well for me? What's going to work well for a practice that I will open? And I just ultimately agreed that, yes, a business partner would be the best way to go about it. How I decided that Mandy was the best business partner that I would have. So Mandy and myself, we went to university together. So we already spent 5 years in the same school, seeing each other 5 days a week. But we became close during our preceptorship placement in Atlanta, Georgia. So we did placement together for 1 month in America. And during that time, you're away from home, you're working as specialists and registrars. Sometimes it can be challenging. And I felt like Mandy and I supported each other. And from that, we learned that, okay, we're good friends. We value each other. We can support each other when something goes wrong. So if we were to open the practice together and we do have disagreements, or we have things that we need to talk about, communication should be good, because we've already supported each other when we're students and when we're friends. So there will be less of a barrier.
Yeah. And I think that's a good starting mechanism, I feel, because obviously at the beginning of any partnership, and that obviously being the model that you decided on, you need to set those expectations and you need to be open to those discussions. I mean, I'm sure everyone that's listening to this, episode has a partnership experience in some capacity or heard of, and there's always, positives and negatives. I guess one real clear thing is expectation management and what everyone's going to bring, I guess, to the equation. In your instance, being an optometry practice, both being optometrists, I get that the value is relatively clear to one another. But what discussions did you have early on to ensure that was always going to be the case, and how have you, I guess, you maintain that as well? further on down the track.
Mm. So for us, when we agreed to open the practice together, our next question was when. So when we discussed it, we said, okay, we needed to be good practitioners first. And for myself, I said, okay, well, right now it's the beginning of 2022. We're just finished our 2 years out. 2023 might be a good time to open, because if we're forecasting it, there's going to be other life goals outside of optometry that we want to achieve. So for myself, I probably want to have kids in the future. And if we open later down the track, I might have less time to dedicate to growing the business. And when I spoke to Mandy said, okay, I would either want to purchase a property or open a practice. And that loops back to everyone's priority, right? When you are your people a business partner, you want to make sure that, yes, everyone could be an excellent business partner if you're friends with them, if you're able to communicate with them. But it's ultimately, what stage in life are they at? So for me, I know I wanted to open a practice. For someone else that may be an excellent business partner, they might not be interested in opening a practice at all. Or they might think, okay, I want to open a practice, but not now, maybe in 10 years' time. I really want to buy a house. I really want to do a side hustle. So for Mandy and myself, we both went, okay, we both want to open a practice. Yes, we want to own property, but we feel like opening a practice would be more rewarding, and we can revisit other personal goals down the track, because it's either you delay one or you delay the other, and we chose to prioritize opening a practice. And that has ultimately worked really well for us. In terms of talking about expectations, that is something that every single person should go through together with their business partner if they're deciding to open together, especially when you're opening something as big as a clinic. You're no longer just friends, you're tied together financially. So you can sit down, have a talk, what your expectations are, what your boundaries are, and what you value in a partnership. So for myself and Mandy, we already decided that we want to open together because we were friends. But over time, we had conversations where we were like, okay, look, I want to just give the patient the best solution for them. We just ultimately want to have more autonomy in the business, want to be able to prescribe what we want to prescribe. And we aligned well with that. We aligned well on prioritizing opening a practice rather than purchasing property. So that aligned well with us too. And the next thing was going through the itty-gritty. So if you're dividing through tasks, who's going to do what? At the beginning, we said, okay, let's make sure we both work on everything together, just so that we know how the other person operates. If one person needs to go on holiday, if one person needs to be away from the practice for a period of time, if you don't know what they're doing, how are you going to support them when they're away? So at the beginning, we said, okay, when we open, we need to make sure we're both there. We understand each other's flow. We understand what each other are doing. And then we decide on what roles we want to take. So for Mandy looks after bats. I look after marketing and social media. We're both optometrists. We both do admin. We both ultimately work on improving clinic flow, but there are tasks that we delegate to make sure it's fair. There's other things that you want to look at as well. So I'm not going to go through everything, but just things that as they're popping up on my mind right now. When you open a partnership, what is it that you want to make it safe? So for me and Mandy, we said, look, if we open this business, it's between me and you. No family involvement, because it's really difficult when you have other people inputting their thoughts into the business. Whereas if it's just you and your friend, you can sit down and you can talk about it. Bounce off ideas and you can ultimately solve it. But if you have someone else there, that's family, you're going to have emotions play in, and that may create an obstacle and a challenge to your business relationship. The second thing is we want to make sure that we prioritize our health as well. So if someone's feeling unwell, you have to say, you don't push through. Ultimately, you prioritize the business, but your health comes before the business, because if you're not healthy, you can't work, and you can't work well, and ultimately the other person takes over. Financial wise, when we open, everyone puts in the same amount. I know there are times when people told us, I don't recommend 50-50. We've been told that so many times. You always do 51-49. But for us, we know, okay, if we're going to be opening together and we're going to be business partner, it's 50-50.
Mm.
So that's how you truly know that you're both going to be putting 100% in the business.
Yeah.
If you make one person own more, one person own less, then at some stage, they're going to have negative feelings and you won't work as well together.
Mm.
Ironing out anything that might make it feel like it's an obstacle in the future, you should be ironing out at the beginning. It might make things a little bit tricky. You might have a little bit of headbutting with each other, but you rather address this early on than later down the track.
Yeah, I've got two questions based on that. You said people were telling you not to have one person have a majority shareholding as opposed to the other person. When you said people, were you getting advice of anyone specific, or was there, how were you sort of going through that particular, I guess, obstacle, and who were the people that you were reaching out to for advice?
So for us, we were just going to the Oddma Fair that year. I believe it was the Oddma Fair. And we just met other experienced optometrists where they told us, oh, look, I recommend 51-49. Or sometimes when we're told to accountants, they're like, no, we recommend, one person always having more. That's just the normal business model anyway. We also had people telling us, you guys are going into a partnership?
Mm-hmm.
I don't recommend it because most partnerships break off in 2 to 3 years.
Right.
And I remember specifically one person telling us, oh, look at this person at the fair right now. They used to have a business partner, but they just sold out. So for us at that stage, we looked at each other. We're like, oh, we think we'll be okay. If it happens, it happens, as long as we've put in measures to prevent that from happening as much as possible. Then, at the end of the day, you've tried. Sometimes things just doesn't work. And if you've done everything you can, then you should be proud that you've tried rather than, don't do this. There's a risk. There's a risk in everything. There's a risk in opening a business on its own. So
Absolutely. I mean, and the reason why I'm spending a little bit of time on this is because I feel like, partnerships is a really strong way, especially for a new business owner to consider, because you do get a person to support you in the beginning parts of the business, which is sometimes if not the hardest part of business, is getting it off the ground. And if you're able to spread that responsibility across two people, then all of a sudden, and I'm sure we'll come to speak to some of these things a little bit later on. And you've already mentioned it with regards to, divvying tasks like marketing and BAS and things like that. So that you can, if you've got to do that all yourself, if you're unwell for a period of time, who's going to look after the business then? What does it look like then? So definitely positives and negatives. But going forward, I feel like, again, it's such a powerful tool, partnerships, and if done correctly, it has the ability to really empower and make it a tangible achievement. I mean, it's very hard as a young optom to start a business unless you're financially backed in other ways. If you're going out there and starting Greenfield, which is obviously the case that you are in, there is so much that you need so much help and support. So to have someone to assist you in that regard, it just enables the chance of success to increase. It does create other issues potentially, of which we're touching on now. But at the same time, it also creates opportunity, and it's like, you've got to manage the two of those. And this is where I think with what you're demonstrating here is a lot of proactive communication, strategic thought, understanding the importance of it and how you're going to go through it, which leads me then the second question I had with what you said, which was, being forced to have conversations. Like, I can imagine as a friend, first and foremost, you've probably been in situations where you've had to have, tricky or tough conversations. How do you manage that? And I guess what advice do you have for people, especially sort of getting into the thought of partnerships, with dealing with the tricky conversations and the importance of having them?
look, difficult conversations, they're editable. When we opened, we had a lot of difficult conversations. Things might feel easy breezy. Yes, we've decided to open together, but when you go from talking to your friends once a week, once a month, to working together every day, seeing each other 7 days a week, it becomes a little bit different because, you're both tired, you're fatigued, sometimes you step on each other's toes. And there are things where you have to bring the difficult talk up. For me, what I've learned is when you set out to do something, you either thrive or you survive. So if you're going to nitpick on every single thing, you're probably going to survive. You'll be okay, but you'll suffer a little bit. But to thrive, you want to be able to identify the problem. Is it actually a problem? Is it something that bothers you? Is it because of how you're feeling right now? Or is it actually going to be a problem for the future? So when we come up, or when I'm faced with a challenge or a situation, I learn to take a step back just to see the whole situation, see whether the battle's worth fighting, and try to understand the other person's perspective. Because ultimately, they also want what's best for the practice, what's best for themselves. And once you see that, it will be a lot easier to communicate. You can't control how someone might respond to you, but you can control how you think and how you respond to someone. And if they're able to see that your intentions are good, you're able to communicate and you're able to fix any problem.
Yeah.
So far.
Yeah, I honestly, I think that's awesome. Like, I mean, because I think you're spot on. I really feel like, the ability to have empathy and the ability to sort of, you will know that you're both steering in the same direction. You're going to have this, you want the same thing. You both want to be successful, and you can articulate that. It's like when you're having an argument, there's this concept. I'm not arguing against you. The difficult conversation isn't against you. It's me and you against the situation or the challenge. And the tricky conversation that we need to have is so that we can tackle the challenge together in the right way. And that's where, you pitch yourself against the challenge as opposed to pitching yourself against each other. You mentioned they want the best for the business. And that's the key question too. If their decision-making is in the best interest of the business, then, and you're being empathetic, the reality of it is you can get together and you can have a chat as honest as it may need to be. And at the end of it, you're in a better situation, in a better place. And I think you're right. If that's something that you can maintain through your partnership and in partnership in general, more often than not, you're going to be able to achieve, or get through the difficult times, because you will have more of them. They're not going to end. It'll come up in a different form. And so having that mindset is really, really critical.
Exactly. And look, on that note, when you have a partnership, yes, there will be things that you may not be happy about, but at the end of the day, you have to know no one's perfect. No business partner can be perfect. So for myself, I'm not a perfect business partner. I have things to learn. My business partner have things to learn and improve as well. So ultimately, as long as you communicate and you're logical in solving the situation or the challenge, then that's the best outcome that you can get for yourself and for the practice and your business partner.
Yeah. And I guess as we start to wrap up, this concept of partnership, and again, like I've said, and I really want to say it again, because I think it's so, so important that, as a stepping stone for new business owners in our industry, I do feel like partnerships is it's a area that needs to be explored, whether it's through optometrist and optometrist, or whether it's through finding a dispenser, and having an optometrist partner with a dispenser. There are key activities in our industry that are fundamental that you need to have alignment on. And as a stepping stone, I think it has to be considered at every level. And so again, that's why I'm spending a bit of time on it. But what red flags, what lessons should others watch out for, when considering a partnership?
Look, in terms of red flags, it is hard to say because, as I mentioned before, no one's perfect. There's always going to be some flaws. There's going to be improvements that you want to make to your partnership. You can go, oh, look, this person's lacking in ABC. This other person's better in, X, Y, Z. But at the end of the day, if you have the drive, if you're okay with communicating with them, and if you can both logically come up with a solution together, then you will be a good partner. Just because if you sit down and you look at people, there will be probably red flags that you can think about. But I think for myself and Mandy, we haven't come across anything where we went, oh no, this is a red flag, we can't open together. So I think in that aspect, I wouldn't have too much to input on my end. But I know, like, if I was to look at it objectively, if someone goes, look, this is the only amount of time I want to spend on the practice, or look, I don't want to commit to this, then You want to find a business partner that's able to commit 50-50 with you. You don't want to be doing 90-10. You don't want to do 80-20 or vice versa for them as well. So as long as you try your best, you should be able to be okay. Yeah. And look, like in terms of partnership itself, it's so great because you can bounce ideas off each other. You can have a new idea where you would have had never thought about it yourself, and your business partner would have come up with it. And that would have ultimately elevated the practice, allowed us to open, a different area of interest for the practice itself, have more patients, be able to develop more relationship with allied health practitioners when there's two people versus one. Just because as good as you are as a practitioner, as talented you are as an individual, there's only one of you. And there's only so much that one person can do before they hit their limit. And if you're opening a practice and you're doing it alone, with no guide, with no experience, we don't have someone telling us what to do step by step. You can crash and you can get very exhausted. And that's when having a business partner is so great, because when you feel like you're down and out, there's someone out there that will go, look, I can take this on. I can look up. I can
And
carry
vice
it.
versa.
Yeah, and vice versa. And that's why partnership is so important, especially as young professionals in this day and age when opening a practice is difficult and you're faced with a lot of challenges to grow the industry.
I agree totally. And that's why, again, I've been excited to have you come on and talk about that specifically, because as far as I know, and I'm sure there are other stories out there that I'm not familiar with, but you're the example of a success story when it comes to creating a partnership and going through those early stages and forming it. And a lot of it has happened, in our discussion, it sounds easy, but there's been a lot of deep thought in this, obviously, from the beginning through to where you are now. And again, partnerships are an evolving thing. The journey is still continuing. So there'll be more to learn, but I think, those key ingredients that you've identified and we've been able to speak about from this point, I think are really key ingredients that others, if they're looking to get something, need to be aware of. And I feel like communication, empathy, understanding that you've got common goals, you're at a common stage in life. There's a lot of elements of synergy there that you've got to understand and know that, these are really important things. So I feel like in what we've discussed, there are so many nuggets of gold for people to listen back to and be like, oh, you know what, I'm thinking about partnerships. Let's start talking about this and let's be open about it. Let's have the conversation, because, it's in conversation that, things occur. But yeah, I guess from that point of view, that's great.
Thanks for listening to The Focused View. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a 5-star review, subscribe on your preferred podcast app, and share it with your colleagues. It helps us reach more eye care professionals across Australia. For additional resources and downloads, visit thefocusedview.com.au. I'm Michael Nasser. Until next time, keep focused.